Hey everybody, welcome back to dragon hunting. It took 3 days camping out in the hills, but it finally happened. At noon, Emine lay down to take a nap under a willow. He was awakened by the sound of thrashing nearby. Emine sat up, frowning in confusion. The meadow had been very quiet every time he'd slept here before. There was a hiss and a snap, followed by a yip and thumping. Carefully, he peeked through the trailing limbs. 2 yellow creatures were wrestling with each other. Lean bodies, small leather wings, glittering scales, serpentine necks, and a mouth full of sharp teeth. Dragons. He'd finally found fucking dragons. Silently, Emine freed his sword from his scabbard. Leaving his pack, but strapping on his shield, he moved as quietly as possible towards the creatures. Emine was a little disappointed. The stories he had heard had been greatly exaggerated. Dragons were supposed to be big. These were no bigger than young cows. Looking at the size of the wings, there's no way they could fly. He should have known the other knights completely lied to make themselves look good. One dragon was slightly larger and darker than the other. They were chasing each other around the clearing. The smaller one ran, but the larger stepped on its tail. It spun around and hissed, then pounced on the larger dragon, nipping at its neck. He was about 15 feet away when they noticed him. With an angry hiss, the larger one came to stand between Aomine and the smaller. It spread its wings, arched its neck, and opened its mouth, revealing the double rows of teeth. Brown eyes glared at him. It roared, but Aomine could feel the bluff in it. He'd faced wild boars more frightening than this overgrown lizard. Emine lifted his sword, slightly bent his knees, and prepared to charge. One swift strike, and he would take the dragon's head. Just as he released the tension in his muscles and sprang forward, a cloud blotted out the sun. The dragons fell into deep shadow. The ground shook beneath his feet, causing him to stumble. Emine stabbed his sword into the ground to keep from falling. When he looked back up, he was staring into the mouth of a dragon not 2 feet away, but the teeth were as long as himself. He could have walked down the corridor of its throat without ducking his head. This time, when the roar came, it was deafening. Emine was blown back, losing his sword and landing awkwardly on his back. He looked up and up as the head reared back. An enormous red dragon stood before him. Red eyes burning with fury. It would kill him. Emine knew this without a doubt. His death was in those eyes. Emine had no intention of dying like a turtle on his back. Climbing back to his feet, he charged forward, snatching up his sword from where it had fallen a few feet from him, and braced to fight. Fear coiled in his gut. He had a weapon that would damage it, but how would he deliver a killing blow to something the size of a small mountain? It might kill him, but he was going to cause it pain first. He glared up at the beast. He might be scared, but damned if he'd show it. The dragon's lips pulled back in a snarl, glistening fangs on full display. It lunged forward, snapping at him. Only the distance separating them gave him time to react. It was fast, but he could only cover 100 feet so fast. Emine swung, but the dragon pulled back, and the sword whistled harmlessly inches from its snout. He was so focused on the teeth, he didn't notice the tail until it crashed into him, sending him flying. Emine sat up, his world spinning. Sword and shield gone. He couldn't see them nearby. He felt the ground shiver and heard the booming sound of steps as the dragon approached. Desperately, he looked around for any kind of weapon. Nothing, just short green grass. Absently, he noticed the little yellow dragons were gone. He attempted to get to his feet, but fell back to his knees. He could feel blood running down his temple. Still dazed, but he refused to die a coward. He stared up, staring into those burning eyes defiantly. Fire licked around the dragon's lips. Nostrils flared wide as it sucked in a mighty breath. Then the sky fell. The piece of sky landed in front of Aomine. Confused, he stared at the light blue expanse blocking his view of the red dragon. A tail slithered through the grass at his knees. Another dragon. It stood on its hind legs, wings stretched wide, shielding Aomine from the dragon's fiery breath. What was going on? The new dragon was only half the size of the red, but still much larger than Aomine. The red roared, but the blue did not waver. Aomine had been ready to die and faced it head-on, but what happened next took the strength from him. He sat down hard on his heels, jaw agape in surprise. The dragon spoke. He didn't understand the words, but the sound was gentle and firm. The red's response was angry and filled with the snapping of jaws. They conversed for a minute, until finally the red let out another roar, this one in frustration. The ground shuddered as it launched into the air. Red eyes glared at him furiously before speeding off into the sky. Amine's attention went back to the blue. It turned its long neck to look down at him from over its shoulder. Carefully, it settled back on 4 feet, watching Aomine. Sky-blue eyes looked him over. Once he was satisfied with whatever it saw, it gave Aomine a polite nod, then it, too, took to the air. He tried to follow it with its eyes, but once he was free of the ground, it disappeared. The red was only a distant speck in the sky. Shaking from the experience, Aomine climbed to his feet and began searching the field for his things. Dragons spoke. They could communicate. Why hadn't anyone told him? They were supposed to be these great slathering beasts, monsters that killed without remorse. Once he had gathered all his things, he dropped to the ground beneath the willow again, leaning exhausted against the trunk. Omine may not have gone to school. The only thing he'd ever been taught was to fight and drink. But he wasn't stupid. He had tried to kill a couple of children, and an adult had come to their rescue. It made perfect sense. What he didn't understand is why had he been saved? He'd come to murder dragons. Murder. Omine said the word to himself, accepting that that's what he had been planning to do. When you deliberately destroy intelligent life, it's murder. Exhausted, mentally and physically, Omine let himself slip into unconsciousness, guarded by the branches of the willow. A tail slithered through the grass. A tail slithered through the grass. Bah! Slithered through. A tail slithered through the grass at his knees.